The Tower of London. London, England. Over the past 1,000 years, the Tower of London has seen more than its fair share of murders, executions, tortures, and poisonings. It's little wonder therefore that a few of its victims should remain there in death. On the 12th of February 1957, a guardsman came face to face with one of the ghostly residents at the foot of the Salt Tower. It was 3 a.m. when something stripped the roof of the sentry box in which he was sheltering from the rain. Stepping out, he looked up and shouted, bringing out the guard captain and the duty warder. They searched the tower and found nothing. Is it a coincidence that on the 12th of February 1554 Lady Jane Grey was beheaded on Tower Green, which lies less than 200 yards/600 feet away from Salt Tower? One of the best-known ghosts is Anne Boleyn, who also lost her head on Tower Green. She's said to carry her head under her arm on the eve of her death. A sergeant serving with their artists' rifles was on duty that night before several spies were due to be executed during World War I. He claimed that the night before Carl Lodi was executed, he saw Anne Boleyn in a silk dress and a white ruff. Anne's also been seen in the Tower Chapel. One night, guard captain and a sentry set off on their rounds. When they reached the chapel they saw lights coming from inside. The captain sent for a ladder and climbed to a window to look within. He found the interior lit with a blue-white light. A ghostly procession of men and women in the Tudor costume could be plainly seen walking down the central aisle. At bit of the procession with Anne Boleyn. Suddenly the light faded and the chapel was left in total darkness. It's not only ghosts of people that visit the tower. In 1816 a sentry was walking his beaten front of the jewel house when he saw a dark shape moving on the steps of the building. He approached the huge figure just as the moon came out from behind some clouds, reviewing a huge bear lunging at him. Panicked, he struck out at the bear with his bayonet, but the blade simply passed through the bear, which then engulfed him. He was later found unconscious by another sentry and died shortly after. Experiences from England. I stir up spirits wherever I go. I bought a house in Brighton in Sussex, built in 1877. It had been owned by a policeman who bought it new, then his spinster daughter who died in it. It was in a dreadful state and took 3 months to get the kitchen and bathroom habitable. Moved in and spent another 6 months getting the rest of the house together. My husband restores old buildings, making them as they were originally. We took all the old paint and wallpaper off the walls and framed a section of the original William Morris wallpaper which had been furnished. They did that in Victorian society to preserve wallpaper. Once we finished the place, we settled back to enjoy it. Then some odd things started to happen. When we moved in, a beautiful tabby cat moved in with us. We don't know where she came from, but she was wonderful. One night I woke up suddenly, totally witless with fright. My side of the bed was surrounded with freezing cold air. I lay unable to do anything but reach for my cat, who slept on the bed. The freezing air started to warm up and my terror subsided. We acquired 4 more cats. All strays who came in through the cat flap and wouldn't leave. We'd be sitting in front of the TV and all 5 cats would suddenly turn their heads and stare intently at one place in the room, then all turn away again at the same time. I had plants hanging from the ceiling in macrame holders. Sometimes they'd sway violently as if someone was brushing very hard against them. A friend came to visit for the evening, went up into the bathroom during the course of the visit and came rushing down. He grabbed his girlfriend by the arm and dashed out. He said he'd seen a ghost on the landing upstairs and wasn't staying another minute. Another night we were watching TV with 2 cups of coffee on the table. Something or somebody knocked very hard on it twice. I knew that the spinster had died in the house. Perhaps she liked having the house restored and made beautiful again, and was trying to tell us she liked it that way with animals in it, as she'd had a dog. One time I was at Hampton Court with my husband. Hampton Court was acquired by Henry VIII of England from one of his cardinals, whom he felt was getting a bit too wealthy and powerful. Henry had just gotten rid of his first wife and was in the process of obtaining his second wife when he got Hampton Court. Henry was a man driven by his own needs and invented a conscience in order to placate his sense of right and wrong. He knew he was wrong in divorcing his first wife, but his conscience said it was okay because he needed a male heir. So he went ahead and married Anne Boleyn. She gave him trouble, so he had her beheaded and married Jane Seymour. She died in childbirth, so he married Anne of Cleves, whom he thought was very ugly. He called her the Flanders mare. He decided to marry to please himself and married an 18-year-old girl named Catherine Howard. The enemies of the family Howard cooked up some schemes to make Henry think that Catherine was playing him false. Then he'd have her beheaded. I had to tell you this, so what happened to me makes more sense. My husband and I were walking along a corridor. We were the only people there at the time. I was looking out of a window down on a cookhouse in the courtyard. My husband was about 12 feet away. I felt a hard rap on the top of my head. I looked at him and asked him, "What did you do that for?" He was still standing 12 feet away examining a painting. "Do what?" he asked. It was quite apparent he hadn't hit me on the head. We walked down the corridor and round the corner and came across a guide. My husband told him what had happened. The guide said, "I'm not surprised. Catherine Howard ran down that corridor screaming to Henry VIII not to be beheaded as he was praying in this chapel just here. She tries to attract people's attention occasionally. I was that person on that occasion." We moved to a new house 25 miles away from Brighton. It's in the middle of undisturbed countryside down a private lane and was built in 1870. One evening I was washing dishes and saw a very thin, tall, old man, dressed in black, walk through the wall next to the front door at an angle. After that, I saw him walking in and out where there is now a wall, but where the back door to the house once was. Then I started to see an old, tall woman with very white hair. She kept walking through the fence towards some old outhouses that used to be toilets. There's a corner in our lounge room that's permanently freezing cold. Even if we have the heat on and a fire going. We have a huge ingle nook fireplace that about 6 people could sit in. It doesn't matter how warm the room is, it always stays cold. The nursery in the INN. Nova Scotia, Canada. This happened to my parents and little brother, who was asleep at the time, so he never knew. My parents rented a large room with 2 double beds in an inn in Lunenburg. About 1 a.m. my mom was woken by what sounded like a baby crying. She ignored it for a while and went back to sleep. She couldn't sleep because the baby was really loud. It sounded like it was coming from inside the room in the corner at the end of my brother's bed. She figured it must be a baby in the room next door. She said the baby sounded not much more than a year-old and sounded really sick. She heard what sounded like the mother singing to the baby about an hour later. At 4 a.m. she finally got up and went into the shared bathroom in the hall. She decided to see if she could offer the people in the next room any help. She knocked really softly on the door. A woman answered, looking slightly sleepy and annoyed. Mom asked her, "Is everything okay? Do you need any help?" The woman gave her a weird look and said, "No, everything's fine." My mom went back to their room. She couldn't sleep because the baby was still crying. This went on for another hour or so. The cries got lower and lower, the singing louder and louder. Suddenly the cries stopped with a deep breath. The singing stopped. A loud strangled sob and light wail occurred. Then quiet. Mom got up and listened at the door. Everything seemed fine. She figured the baby stopped crying and the mom was overcome with exhaustion and made the little cry. At about 11 a.m. they checked out. The innkeeper asked my parents if they enjoyed their stay and had a good night's sleep. Dad and my brother said yes right away. My mom must have looked disturbed because the innkeeper pulled her aside and asked her, "Are you okay?" Mom said, "Yes," then said, "Don't take this as a complaint because it's not, but I didn't sleep well because of the baby crying." The innkeeper looked at her funny and asked, "Dear, what do you mean?" She explained what happened the night before. She told her that she knocked on the door and asked if there was anything she could do to help. She told her about the annoyed, puzzled look on the woman's face. The innkeeper laughed and said, "No wonder, dear. She had no children, and certainly not a baby. In fact, your son was the youngest person here last night." My mom was stunned. She asked, "How's that possible?" The innkeeper went on to tell her that the room they stayed in used to be a nursery when the inn was a single-family home. In the early 1900s there was a young mother with twin babies. One of the babies was really sick and died. The night the baby died, supposedly, the baby cried all night. The mother sang, trying to soothe her. A lot of people had heard the baby. The innkeeper decided not to make it known. She was worried it would scare away customers. Ghosts of Okinawa. Japan. Start with some history of the Ryukyu Island chain. First, Okinawa Island is a few hundred miles from the island of Taiwan and Japan's mainland. It's in the far West Pacific Ocean. This was one of the largest battle sites during World War II. It was once an island country unto itself but has been fought over for centuries by Japan and China. It was captured near the end of the war by US forces. It remained a US property until the late 1970s, when it was returned to Japan as a show of good faith. The following stories occurred after World War II. A protective mother. Many years ago, as the story goes, a middle-aged man lived by the China Sea, in an area the US military calls the Gate 4 area. This man owned a small and somewhat successful candy store. Every night just after dusk he'd count the money he'd made for the day, then close for the night and go home to his family. One night as he appeared to close the store and count his money, a young and pretty woman entered his store. He tried to tell her he was closed, but she insisted that she must buy some candy for her baby. Both Japanese and Okinawans loved their children very much to the point of spoiling them. Knowing how she must feel, he agreed to sell to her. She bought the candy and then left the store. The man then put the money down and began to count his earnings. When he was about finished, he noticed that some of the money wasn't the proper currency. Some was the money the Japanese and Okinawans give at the shrines to the deceased. This puzzled him greatly. Where did he receive the shrine money? Slightly bewildered, he went home. The next night when he was about to close, the same woman appeared in the store. Remembering that she'd come in the store the night before, he asked her if he could help her. She asked for some candy for her baby. Again, she made the purchase and left the store. Like the night before when he went to count his money, there was shrine money in the mix. He went home for the night confused. On the third night, about the same time as the other two nights, the woman appeared and asked to buy some candy. This time the storekeeper held onto the money until she left. When she did, he opened his hand and saw shrine money. He quickly tried to follow her. He saw her go down the street and make a turn. When he rounded the corner, she was nowhere to be seen. He turned to walk back to his store when he heard a small cry. He went to one of the shrines he'd heard the noise from. There was another small cry. He left to tell the police. When they got back, they too heard the noise. They decided it would be best if they opened it. When they did, they found the corpse of a young woman and a baby who was very alive. They took the baby from the arms of the dead woman and reported it to the family who owned the shrine. They'd informed the police that their missing daughter had been expecting. From then on, the Japanese and Okinawans stopped leaving shrine money. Now they leave real currency. Highway 12. This is a story about an area known here by the US military as the 400th area or AMMO. The 400th area is a huge zone in which we keep our armaments. There are lots of roads, very few buildings, and tons of jungle. The jungle makes up over 70% of the area. As the story goes, during Typhoon Steel, another name for the Battle of Okinawa, we had many Marines here doing cleanup of the Japanese forces. In the area now known as the 400th, a small platoon of soldiers marched down a small road back to base camp. They were tired, hungry, and eager for some well-earned rest. They marched down this road in column formation, not really trying to be quiet. They felt the sector was cleared and safe. There was a shout as the first bullet pierced the silence. They'd marched into an ambush, the road not being more than a few feet wide and having high slopes on both sides. The American troops weren't in much condition to fight or run. They began to fire into the jungle. It was a fierce battle, but in the end all of the US troops were killed. Many Japanese soldiers were also killed. Almost 3/4 of them had died. Many years later the US government decided to build an ammunition dump in this area. They made many roads. As a security measure, MP and security police patrol this area for intruders. The first sighting was a few years after the 400th area was built. The name of the road was Highway 12. One night while patrolling on his own, an MP noticed something moving ahead of him on the road. As he drove down, he started to hear gunshots. That's when he saw his first ghost. Years later, reports from police, security, and workers reported hearing gunshots or screams while driving down that road at night. There was one reported incident of an MP driving through the apparitions. And, who's an MP, took me through this area many times. According to rumors, if you drive up this road from south to north, there's a chance you'll hear or see something, maybe even both. Many people who work or guard the 400th area won't drive alone unless the car radio is playing. Haunted apartment in Okinawa, Japan. My husband was stationed to Kadena AFP in Okinawa. We were required to live off base until housing on base became available. We were lucky enough to find a large, 2-bedroom apartment that was on the 3rd floor, just outside Gate 5. Only Americans lived in the complex. Okinawans won't live in a place that's haunted or thought to be. I don't know if that's why they didn't live there or not. Nothing weird happened for the first 2 months. Then one night I was washing the dishes. While I was rinsing the silverware, I accidentally put the steak knives in the drainer with the blades facing up. While I was rinsing some plates and putting them in the draining rack, I scraped my arm on the knife blades. I turned all of the blades down and went back to washing dishes. My husband came in and was talking to me for a few moments. When I got through rinsing some dishes and was in the process of putting them in the rack, I discovered all the knives were turned over again with the blades up. I asked him if he turned them over while he was talking to me. He said that he hadn't. The next thing that happened was around Christmas. My husband was sitting at the desk working on the computer when he gasped, jerked his glasses off, and scooted his chair back, all at the same time. My son and I asked him what was the matter, and he said that something poked him in the forehead above his left eyebrow. After he calmed down, he decided it was a muscle spasm and went back to the computer. About 10 minutes later, my son, who was sitting in the front room, yelled, "Mom! There's smoke coming out of the bathroom and it's going up the hall." By the time I got there, it had disappeared. I asked him what it looked like. He said, like a grey smoke or mist that floated up the hall toward the front door and vanished. Then things would go missing. You'd tear the house up looking for them and then find them in plain sight. I'd always see dark, darting shadows from the corner of my eyes. At first, I thought it was someone passing by the front window, but as time went on, I noticed that there was never anyone there. I always felt a cool breeze sweep across the floor. It seems to happen just to me. One afternoon, I was at the sink filling ice trays. The cold breeze blew on just the right side of my face. It blew my hair on that side and felt like someone was touching me. I didn't have any windows open, no fans going, and the air conditioning was off. About that time, early April, our neighbors upstairs moved on base. Their apartment stayed empty for 3 weeks. During that time, we'd hear footsteps. They'd sound heavy like an adult's, or run like a child's. You'd hear furniture being dragged across the floor, rapping, taps, and bangs. I thought someone must have moved in and went upstairs to meet the new family, only to find out that the apartment was empty. During the end of May, we were getting ready to move on base and the activity increased. I was taking a nap and my son came in and woke me up. He was a little scared and told me he saw a ghost. I got up and he showed me where he saw it. There's a small hall that leads to the bathroom, and on one side is a small Japanese washer. On the other side is a sink with a large mirror. He was trying to pull out a loose tooth. He was 11 and had climbed up in the sink to see better. While he was wiggling his tooth, he happened to look up. In the mirror he saw a greyish thing watching him. It was peeking from the right side of the washer. He said, it was kind of wrinkled and had black holes where its eyes were, a slit for a mouth, and looked kind of skull-like. He said it startled him, and when he turned to look at it, it vanished. He thought he was just seeing something, blew it off, and went back to wiggling his tooth. He looked in the mirror again and there it was. Only this time it was peeking from the left side of the washer. Again, it vanished when he turned to look at it. That's when he came and got me. It wouldn't show itself to me. The next day my son and I were playing a computer game and we heard a crash come from my bedroom. We got up to see what it was. My lamp had been knocked off onto the floor. There's no way it could have fallen off on its own. It's about 15 or 20 pounds. We cleaned up the mess. When my husband came home from work, I told him what happened. Later that night I got dressed for bed and decided to look at my coins. I have several, including 3 mercury head dimes. I got out my magnifying glass and was digging through my collection looking for a certain mercury dime. It wasn't there. I found the other 2, but I couldn't find the one I was looking for. I tore up my bedroom looking for it. I went through my nightstand, drawers, and under the bed, but I couldn't find it. I finally gave up and put the coins away and went to sleep. In the morning when I woke up, it was laying on my nightstand right beside my head. I know for a fact there was nothing there when I went to bed, because the lamp had fallen off earlier that day and there was nothing left. We were cleaning the furniture as well as the apartment. My husband was in the bedroom. I was in the hall with the washer, cleaning the sink. My husband had the only roll of paper towels that we had with him. I asked him if he had any more. He said, "Yeah. They're on the dresser." I went to get them, and couldn't find them. We looked in the bedroom, front room, and kitchen. He was getting frustrated, not being able to find them. After a while we gave up and went to bed. In the morning when we got up, my son was already eating a Pop-Tart, wrapped in a paper towel. My husband asked him where he got the towel from. He said they were laying by the phone. Sure enough, there they were in plain sight. Ever since we moved into the apartment, there was a bad smell. It was like rotten eggs or sulfur. It wasn't there all the time. It would come and go. Story from West Malaysia. Malaysia. In my life I've experienced 3 ghostly activities. My first sister heard noises but had no concrete proof of it being paranormal. My second sister had a full perspective of an apparition which was connected to the story I'm about to tell. My last sister, at 2 years of age, freaked out hysterically for 20 seconds whilst staring at the air. This was explained later when she was 3, very vividly but with no hard evidence. The incident had an unusual side effect. The apparition seemed to be a Victorian Englishman who was dressed in black with a top hat and had red, glaring eyes. After seeing the apparition, my sister constantly complained about pain in her right leg. She went to the doctor. Her pain was revealed to be from a twisted joint with very odd characteristics. It was dismissed as a mere double joint. She said when the man had appeared before the pain started, he bit her with great force on the spot she had problems with. Unexplained Incident 1. One night the bed began to shake violently for a few seconds. I jumped and ran to my sister's room. I tried to rationalize it. I took it as a ground tremor. If it was a ground tremor, my sisters, who were wide awake at that time, must have felt it as well, but they didn't. Then I began to check out my room, especially areas near my bed. Unexplained Incident 2. This was told by my sister when she was 8 years old. One afternoon she went upstairs to her room. Before she got there, she saw a black, hazy figure of a cat-sized creature. It looked like a rat. She drew it after the incident. It had fangs and glaring eyes. It came from under my bed and chased her into her room, vanishing under her bed. My dad and I raced upstairs in reaction to her hysterical screams. She was standing on a chair mumbling, shocked, and pale. We searched her room for this creature with no luck. After that apparition, my room was free from the poltergeist. Unexplained Incident 3. I just moved to eastern Malaysia and was staying in my grandmother's house. This house was rented by people and aged to World War II when the Japanese came to Malaysia and created havoc. At 1 a.m. one night I came back late from my part-time job. We'd just moved into the house and my room was near the back. I was tired and slept easily. Before the apparition came into view, I was half awakened by dogs barking and muffled voices. Much like the sound of 2 tape recorders played backwards. I opened my eyes to be greeted by a floating, vivid, transparent human head. Just a head in midair. It stared at me for about 4 seconds. I took in the details of the sad, almost unanimated face before it suddenly vanished. Almost instantly, the dogs stopped barking and all was silent. I turned on the lights and tried to rationalize the whole thing. I woke up the next morning in my grandmother's room. I was 16 at the time and I didn't want to let the apparition become another unsolved experience. So I asked around. My grandmother said that the previous people who rented the house had also seen such apparitions, but with different intensities. One tenant saw a ghostly body of a man without a head walking around the rooms. My new friends said they'd been seeing weird things floating near the back of the house. After telling my parents, they had the house checked by a spiritualist. He said the man I'd seen was Chinese and was a sad ghost. The man was beheaded by the Japanese communists during the war. The man's death was upon his own request. This was because his 6 months pregnant wife was cut open by the communists and was then executed without reason. He took his sorrow and grief with him. He wasn't properly buried. Near my room, under a small tree, lay the skull of a Chinese man. About 20 miles away lays his body in a cemetery. These facts explain the apparitions. The head was searching for a matching body and vice versa.
If you like creepy stories like these, please subscribe to the channel.